got some folks jumping on. Lovely, welcome. We'll just give everyone about a minute so that Zoom can jump everyone on. Thanks for being here. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and start an intro, I think, as everyone's jumping in. Hi, Carol. It's great to have you. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Curator Talk to celebrate a movement in every direction, legacies of the Great Migration. My name is Mackenzie Drake, and I'm the Assistant Curator of Public Programs and Community Engagement here at the Mississippi Museum of Art. I just want to thank you all for joining tonight's program. This evening, we're joined by the curators of this wonderful exhibition, Ryan and Dennis, Chief Curator and Artistic Director for the Center for Art and Public Exchange here at the Mississippi Museum of Art, and Jessica Bell-Brown, the Curator and Department Head of Contemporary Art at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Tonight, we're going to hear about their journey, insight, and reflections as curators of this exhibition. Before I formally introduce these amazing women, I'd like to extend a thank you to our audience, our team at the Mississippi Museum of Art, and our team at the Baltimore Museum of Art. It has truly been a pleasure to see this show come together and now to see our audience engage with the artwork on view. Additionally, I'd like to thank our museum members and our sponsor, Trustmark, for supporting this online program. For our audience, if anyone has questions or would like to share some love and support with our curators tonight, please feel free to use the Q&A and chat features. We'll be monitoring these areas of the Zoom call, and we'll take a few questions near the end of the program. This program will also be recorded, and we will release the recording on our website in a few days. Now, without further delay, let me introduce the curators of this exhibition more formally. Ryan and Dennis is the Chief Curator and Artistic Director for the Center for Art and Public Exchange at the Mississippi Museum of Art. Her recent projects include Collective Care for Black Mothers and Caretakers, a Cape residency project by Shawnee Peters, organized with the local Jackson community, Betty Saar Call and Response, Piercing the Inner Wall, The Art of Dusty Bonget, and Leonardo Drew, City in the Grass. She has published widely and been a visiting lecturer and critic at a number of art schools and institutions. She was co-curator of the 2021 Texas Biennial and currently serves as guest editor for Gulf Coast, a journal of literature and fine arts. And Jessica Bell-Brown is the curator and department head of contemporary art at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Her recent projects include How Do We Know the World?, Stephanie Sujuko, Vanishing Point, and Thaddeus Mosley, Forest. Prior to joining the BMA, Brown helmed roles at Gracie Mansion Conservatory, Creative Time, and the Brooklyn Academy of Music. She was the 2016-2017 Museum Research Consortium Fellow at the Museum of Modern Art, New York, where she worked on Robert Rauschenberg Among Friends. A PhD candidate in modern and contemporary art at Princeton University, her writing has appeared in various publications, including Flash Art, Art Forum, Art Papers, and the Brooklyn Rail. I'll now turn it over to Ryan and Jess to introduce the show and share a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie and Elizabeth Callahan, our Director of Education here at the Mississippi Museum of Art. Of course, just gratitude to you all for opening up this space for Jess and I to reflect on this exhibition. And of course, deep, deep gratitude always to my co-curator and co-conspirator and friend, Jessica Bell Brown. Working on this exhibition with you has been truly a highlight of my career, and it's just an honor. So I'm glad that we have been able to carve out some time tonight to share with each other and, with all of the participants in the Zoom room about our show.
Thank you so much, Ryan. As Mackenzie was reading your bio, I had to fight very hard to not be like, yes, yes, yes. No, I'm your number one fan and cheerleader. And I just have to say thank you to Mackenzie and Elizabeth and the entire MMA team, not only for organizing the talk tonight, but for an incredible opening weekend and incredible, prolonged, but worthwhile process in the making of this exhibition project. So deep, deep gratitude to everyone at MMA and to you, Ryan, for the boundless, advice, wisdom, support, encouragement, and laughter that we've had along the way.
Yes. Thank you, Jess. I feel like, remember when we had an interview a few weeks ago with Forbes, or maybe that was The Guardian, and I was like, oh, am I tearing up? We can't say that already. We're just getting started, y'all. Well, of course, welcome to this curator talk. And again, this is kind of reflections that Jess and I have had about our show, and really wanted to be able to share, the makings of the exhibition and talk a bit about, our collaborations with our interpretation and education program departments through, just through kind of sharing out some strategies and talking about the publications that are a part of this exhibition. So maybe we can go to the next slide. So A Movement in Every Direction, Legacies of the Great Migration is an exhibition that is quite ambitious, I think, for both the Baltimore Museum of Art and for the MMA. It to date has been one of the most ambitious projects that our institutions have worked on. And, I think so much of this exhibition was for you and I just to kind of think about this kind of historical phenomena and find a way to talk about the Great Migration in more kind of expansive ways. I think when we both joined our institutions, there was a kernel of an idea on the table, and we wanted to make sure that coming together would allow us to think more broadly about the Great Migration and maybe perhaps what hasn't been shared about the Great Migration in a lot of ways. And earlier today, I was thinking about the timeline of everything over the last, 2 years. And it is quite a feat, honestly. I mean, I'm really kind of like, I don't want to say surprised, because surprise is like surprise feels like a feat we couldn't accomplish, but it really is something special to have been able to organize such an ambitious exhibition and 3 attending publications during the middle of a global health crisis. And I just wondered if you had anything to kind of say about that, the kind of the ambition, the audacity, the kind of, and the excitement of working on an exhibition like this during such a kind of critical and maybe challenging time of our lives as well.
Yeah, no, all of that framing context is so important to keep in mind. In many ways, this was a ground up collaboration in that when we arrived, even before we both arrived at our institutions, me in late 2019, you in early mid 2020, there was already some deep thinking and connectivity around who our institutions are in relation to their audiences, both extant audiences and desired audiences. And the Great Migration, I think, was a very fruitful and generative way to think about the relationships between our museums and concentric circles of communities and localities. And both of our institutions are situated within important nodal points of the Great Migration. Mm-hmm. Mississippi being thought of as like I think more conventionally as a point of departure. Mm-hmm. And Baltimore being one of the first sort of places of arrival. Mm-hmm. And when we came together to sort of think about and breathe life into what this project could look like, I think you and I, amidst all that was going on in the world, right? An impending election, we're sublimating so much that has happened.
I know.
Over the course of this show, but I think one of the things that made this project so beautiful as a collaboration on many levels is our commitment to really thinking deeply about how those narratives might be disrupted, transgressed, expanded, we also brought to it a deep love and care of artists and wanting to foreground a transparent, tender, open dialogue with the artists that we wanted to be in conversation with. So I feel like we had tunnel vision during a very intense and tumultuous time, I think, nationally and globally. So our concept of it's really nice to be able to take a moment now after the opening events, after we've been able to sit with the show to to appreciate, to appreciate the journey. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we could have never predicted too was how kind of timely this exhibition would be in asking people to really reflect on their personal histories and stories, right? In a time when, here we are 2 years after a pandemic, when the thing that people desire most is just a kind of point of stillness to understand self in a way that, this exhibition or this project really allowed for us to give resources and time for artists to do that. Obviously, the prompt was to share their connections to the South, but it was a deeply personal exploration during a time that necessitated an individual to do that.
Absolutely.
So I think, just in terms of kind of tracking through, a timeline, so you kind of shared our early kind of 2020 moment. And, you and I started thinking, big as curators do about artists that we want to work with in the summer of 2020 and started thinking about what type of, dialogical exchanges that we wanted to have with artists as well. And what a publication that turned into 3 publications might look like. So maybe next slide, we can talk a little bit about our roundtable, which happened in March of 2021, right? It was kind of moment. It was March 2021. We had identified and made commitments with artists to participate in the exhibition. And then, we started, because we had to make shifts along the way, our kind of we aspirationally, we were thinking that we would conduct all of these kind of studio visits within the summer and fall months, but we just had to, be flexible and nimble and utilize the kind of Zoom room in a way to build bridges, not only with us and the artists, but the artists in dialogue with one another, which was really important. So we held these 2 sessions on March the 16th and March 19th. Pictured here is Akia Brion with the headphones, and Jamia Richmond Edwards, her dazzling smile, and artist Robert Pruitt. I believe, this kind of the material at the bottom here is source material, that early source material that we were kind of considering for volume 1, our critical reader, which we'll talk about a bit later. I felt like the roundtable was I remember getting off the first call of the roundtable in such triumph, because it's like, we did this thing. And it was a really beautiful conversation. I mean, I think kind of some of the questions that we were asking of artists were, who are you, where you're based, and where your people are from? And really kind of
like maybe 80% of our call, which was amazing.
It was, because we had like a list of kind of 15 to 20 questions that we were like, we're going to get through all of these, but no, really understanding where people were from took a lot of time. And we also asked about how the Great Migration kind of showed up in their family history. It was a moment, I think, too, which was really illuminating, is that bringing all these folks together, one would think that they already kind of had relationships with one another because of the kind of nature of like group exhibitions, et cetera. But for many of them, it was the first time that they met and were in kind of deep dialogue, which was really special. And there was a lot of kind of vulnerability and honesty that came out of that call, which helped shape, I think, our ongoing kind of approach to the show.
Yeah, it was such a level setting moment, right? Like we were not able to, it was almost a full year before we could actually go to studios and be in communion with artists and our writers. And we wanted to, we knew when we were conceiving of the project that there had to be a roundtable. And interestingly enough, that roundtable that became this level setting moment for us to really get connected and to get connected to each other's stories, each other's sort of stakes in what this project could mean, both personally and within, each of the artists sort of. But, it was also a kind of mental mapping for us, right? Like, and there was a lot of discovery happening in terms of like where folks' people were from, and discovering the kinds of continuities across Black stories, Black family stories, was really incredible.
I think it also allowed us to, I think in some of our, kind of Zoom moments with artists individually, we started seeing this idea of like intra-Southern migration. But on this call, I think it became really clear that the intra-Southern migration, meaning the kind of movement between one Southern city to another Southern city, was so much a part of our artist family histories, which just like allowed us to kind of deepen our research and share those narratives as well, right, through the show and through our attending catalogs. I remember Janae Hamilton saying that, she didn't have like a migration story, but the fact was that she did. Her family decided to have this kind of agency and self-determined their kind of movement to stay in the South, which I think was really powerful. Kiase Lehman talked a lot about that, the power of staying. In this call.
It's so, how aligned are we? I'm on page 306 of our critical reader.
Come on now.
In the roundtable, and I'm like looking at one of our pull quotes, which is by Sharifa Rhodes Pitts, one of the contributors to volume 2. And she says, I think a lot about the side that stayed and the side that moved. and how I'm a product of both of those intentions.
Mm.
Really, I think crystallizes so much of what folks who have seen the show or will see the show will see, that interrogation of Southernness alongside this interrogation of movement and migration.
Yeah, definitely. Next slide. So we had an opportunity to, the world opened back up a bit, and we were able to conduct our first in-person studio visit in Baltimore. I came to visit you in October of 2021. Again, like thinking about the timeline is wild. So October 2021, I come to Baltimore, we visit Zoe Charlton, and also make our way to Robert Pruitt in New York. And I think working on these commissions, of course, the studio visit is invaluable, but being able to, we were kind of dealing with these really kind of conceptual ideas and maybe renderings and sketches and drawings for such a long period of time, that going to the studio and visiting with Zoe and seeing, this large drawing mounted in her studio or hanging in her studio. And here, you all can see these kind of mock-up or maquette of what's in the galleries, and the kind of final product of this show was just really special. But it also just allowed for us to kind of talk about evolutions of projects, which is the case of kind of Lakia Brion's work in a lot of ways.
Yeah, we can talk more about Zoe's project later in the conversation, but there's so much to say. But the studio visit was really, a moment for us to kind of understand spatially the ambition for her project. And it also became the same sort of sense of crystallization when we went to New York to see Robert as well. Yeah.
Next slide. I think the next few views are our studio visits and in progress shots with artists. If there's anything that kind of speaks to you here.
This was a really great, I think personally, this was a really great moment for me in that, you have had a long-standing relationship with Robert Pruitt, friendship, you've exhibited his work before, and that warmth, it was so present in the room. And then for me to sort of be your co-curator and have an opportunity to plug into that tenderness was just really lovely. And I feel like I walked away also with a deeper understanding of the richness and complexity in Robert's work, which really can only be experienced in person.
Yeah. I love too this moment in the studio with Robert for all the things that you just shared, also just being there with you, but being able to really see the conversations come to life. I mean, I think this work in particular, which we will also talk a little bit more about later, just allowed us to, I think at this time we were also like reading Sharifa's essay about Camp Logan, and there was just these kind of connections that were being made in a really powerful way that were both kind of connected to other artists, but also the writers in volume 2. I think with commissions, there's just a kind of area of like an unknowing, like ambiguity in a lot of ways. And I think when we started having these studio visits, it was like, we are on the right track, and it feels good. Like,
right. Are they working?
We could breathe. It was just like really special. Yeah.
And the last point before we move away from this is that, I don't know if you remember this, Ryan, or maybe you do, but in both visits with Zoe and with Robert, like there was this moment of like, oh, I've never done this, something as ambitious and as large and something as complex as this. And this kind of like, I remember feeling hyped just like for them in terms of like, wow, we're on this journey together. And,
Completely.
you know, the outcome is gonna be phenomenal, but the just feeling really grateful that we could find a space of convening for these new possibilities to open up in their practices. That was really exciting.
I completely agree. And it's the same for Akia and Jamia. I mean, Akia, next slide. Her studio visit was really exciting because we, it really did take a kind of dramatic shift when we thought that we would see these kind of more traditional archival photographs within the galleries. And, Akia had been working on this kind of jacquard fabric and had some test things to show us, which were brilliant and really pushed her into a new way of working that I think we'll see for a long time within the span of her career, which was really amazing, and then we have next slide. Allison Janae Hamilton also was able to take kind of new heights into her filming, and the way that kind of her installation is also displayed, I think was really powerful. And to do that in North Florida with family and friends and other colleagues to realize this project very ambitiously. I mean, all of them pushed themselves into new ways of working. And I think as curators, that's also like a dream to be able to, shepherd that along and be as supportive as possible. Next slide. Any highlights from this visit with Jamia Richmond Edwards?
I think so Jamia was in the process of her own sort of migration when we began the dialogue about her participation in the show. She was thinking about moving from Maryland back to Mississippi, had bought land and was building a home. And but along the way, I think her research process and her practice, her studio practice, I think led her on a few detours, and she found herself back in Detroit, where she was born.
Yeah.
And I think going to Detroit to see Akia, but also to spend time with Jamia in her studio, and to hear her kind of narrate like what that return meant to her and her family was incredible. And you can kind of feel, hearing Jamia in Detroit talk about Detroit and the kind of aesthetics of Black Detroiters, or Detroit. You see that show up in the work so much, like the kind of the colorfulness, the like bravado, the musicality, the deep sense of a kind of Black diasporic belonging, both culturally, spiritually, et cetera. And there's just a way that there's so much behind her painting, This Water Runs Deep, that was felt, I think, like the volume of that those sensibilities and how they sort of map onto the work was truly felt in the space with her, which was also in this incredible church that had been reclaimed as an artist's residency space. So it was great.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Oh wow, front porch conversation. So, part of I think our strategies as an institution, and I think this would be applicable for the BMA too, is our institutions are situated in predominantly Black cities, really, right? Jackson is 85% African American, and this exhibition really opened up an opportunity for us to be in deeper dialogue with our hyperlocal community. And, one can kind of make assumptions about the Great Migration and what people know about it. But I think through realizing these front porch conversations, which were really opportunities for us to connect with local Jacksonians about the exhibition, what was coming up and what to kind of hopefully expect, but also get feedback from them around our interpretation strategies was really important. So I think over the course of kind of 6 months, I met with Monique Davis, who is who's the director of CAPE and our chief equity and inclusion officer here at the museum. We met with members of our community advisory council. Essentially, a member from the community advisory council would be asked to kind of host a front porch conversation, meaning they would invite their network of people that are not really associated to the museum. And we would talk about our show, and we would talk about their kind of, I think the question that was asked was like, what's your migration story? And it was really enlightening and just wonderful. I mean, I live for the kind of moments to see our community inside of the museum. So yes, the show is like for everyone, but there is something really important about having a museum that's centrally located in a smaller town, in a very Black city that speaks to them because of not only the content, but also the reflections of the artist and the imagery that, can be shared and felt. So the front porch conversations were really a kind of strategy that continues to be a part of our engagement kind of process with our community. And I think with the front porch conversations, one thing that I tried to also kind of implement during this time was a kind of block walking strategy. And the block walking is something that I learned from Project Row Houses. It's a bit different to kind of do it in a larger city, but Jackson is broken up in wards, and so you do have an ability to kind of focus on different wards and have some dialogical exchange, like essentially meeting your neighbor. And the block walking was for me a kind of critical moment for us to just have ongoing strategies around engagement and making sure that people, the people who live here come to this museum, and it's an ongoing invitation. And so, yeah, the front porch conversations and block walking were and are continue to be a part of that strategy. Can you maybe can you share a little bit about how kind of BMA and the partnerships might look while the show is on view there?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, one of the things that was so inspiring to see you and the MMA team and CAPE in particular sort of move into this sort of mode where you're meeting people where they are. And so we do so much work at our institutions to like welcome folks to us, but sometimes it takes us going, out. And it was really, so knowing that you had these ongoing front porch conversations, every time that I would come to Jackson, I would take an Uber from the airport or to wherever in town to do what I needed to do. If I had a Black Uber driver, we would best believe we were talking about the Great Migration. And I was talking about, going to see the show at MMA. And like, I remember one of the weeks that I was installing with you, and I had my invitation with me, and I gave mine to this incredible woman who was my Uber driver, because we spent the entire conversation just talking about her family and it's her connection to the migration. And so it's just to be able to see a different way of engagement that maps onto the kind of specificity of Jackson, and Black Jackson in particular. It was just really awesome, and it's inspiring. Really quickly, at the BMA, we have a set of sort of ongoing dialogues within our adjacent community. And I'm thinking in particular around Lexington Market, which is one of the oldest spaces of commerce and congregation in Baltimore, and a really truly sort of diverse swath of Baltimoreans, most primarily African American, but beyond as well. And the BMA has had over the years a space of engagement, both to display art, also to engage in artist-led workshops and programs. And Lexington Market is a space that we certainly and partner really that we hope to continue to engage as part of Great Migration. So stay tuned for that. We're also thinking about how we connect with other entities who have been doing this work along the lines of thinking about ancestry, thinking about Black Baltimorean history. So I think one sterling example is, of course, Savannah Wood, whom we had the pleasure of hosting as a part of our opening events down at MMA. Savannah is the executive director of Afro Charities, which is an organization that also holds the archives for the Baltimore Afro. The Afro is what it's called, but the Afro-American, which is the oldest running Black-owned newspaper in the country. Savannah and her resources and were integral to, I think, how we were conceiving of our, not only of our book, but how we can think about how archives are not just something that belong to scholars, right? Yeah. They belong to us. And so this sort of collective share in Black stories extends beyond just the art on the walls, but how we give voice to or highlight or place value on voices and stories of that are most proximate to us. So one of the things that we're thinking about, and I'll wrap up here before we move on, is how we can engage the wider public in this question of family narrative and family archives, and what does that look like, not just as as us speaking to audiences, but what a kind of collective sort of knowledge share looks like in making archives accessible to the wider public. So we're really excited to jump into those kinds of conversations and build out sort of intimacies beyond the sort of BMA space when the show comes to us in the fall.
I'm really looking forward to that. Next slide. So I think I'm looking at the time and it's already almost 6:45. And so, the next kind of series of images are installation shots from our galleries here at the MMA. The exhibition starts with the work by Leslie Hewitt, a low profile sculpture, and then you enter into the galleries and are kind of greeted with Robert Pruitt's A Song for Travelers, which is really a kind of large scale drawing that collapses multiple kind of histories over time and really deeply shares about Houston's history and the kind of thinking about Robert's connection to Fourth Ward, which is where his family's from, and then moved from kind of Third Ward and Fifth Ward into more rural parts of Texas. And I think we can go to the next slide if we want to maybe breeze through these. Do you want to share a little bit about Zoe?
Well, I do think it's helpful to sort of give a sense of just context to how we were sort of thinking about designing the show with Robin Dietrich, our incredible, fearless, rigorous exhibition designer and tour manager, and of course, Dave Zimmerman as well here at our exhibition designer here at the Baltimore Museum of Art. But one of the things that was critical for us was to not create a kind of closed system of narratives within the exhibition. Going back to our comments about the roundtable, how there were these sort of rhizomatic connections across family stories, across all of the artists. And so we wanted to acknowledge that interconnectedness by allowing for an also sort of rhizomatic approach to the layout of the show. So folks are talking to each other, and there are these adjacencies that emerged quite beautifully, but also sort of intentionally within the exhibition. So Robert and Zoe's pieces and also Leslie Hewitt's pieces are the first works that you'll encounter in the show. And whereas Robert is tracing generations of Houstonians and across the specific sort of neighborhoods of Third and Fourth Ward, Zoe is thinking about a kind of dispersal into the world by her family members who engaged in military service as a means for advancement, economic and social sort of advancement in her family. And so her project, which we mentioned earlier, this is the most ambitious work that she's made, in that she has moved into this form that is almost like a vignette, a kind of storybook format, where we have a combination of a large-scale monumental wall drawing that is of this landscape of both sort of foreign and domestic flora and fauna. And then at the center of this vignette is a representation of her grandmother's blue bungalow house in North Florida, particularly Tallahassee, which was the foundational spot, the spot for rootedness and generational rootedness and continuity across her family when everyone was sort of out in the world in Okinawa or Vietnam or where have you. So both community, senses of family and community, most proximate to us in terms of regionally or sort of locally, and then also how we understand those connections even when we're far apart from one another.
And Zoe's work really kind of showed us the kind of importance of the military during the Great Migration time. I mean, just as a kind of avenue for upward mobility and thinking about ways to protect, both, kind of financially and otherwise, your family during, seemingly harsh conditions domestically.
Mm-hmm. Next slide.
Theaster Gates Jr, the double wide, this work is such an important, I think understanding Theaster's work for so many years, understanding where Theaster comes from, like being able, during this time we learned that, Theaster came to Mississippi, to Humphreys County to visit with his uncle and his father's side of the family throughout the summer months, and what he kind of described to us as country logic when when we visited the studio with him. This like this country logic is waking up early and kind of moving around the farm and checking on your neighbor and thinking about the kind of resources that are needed to make movement happen on the farm and then like within the community. I feel like it's so illuminating, the double wide, because then you really understand how and why Theaster kind of moves and operates in the ways that he does in Chicago and globally, right? Like he is in literally kind of world building and really, I think, calling for people to think about, land ownership within the spaces that they occupy. The double wide is a kind of a collaboration also with other family members and a local pickler who, has pickled hog mogs and pig ears and vegetables, which are kind of in the corner of this image. And in addition to inside of this trailer, hitched to another trailer, which resembles his uncle's double wide. And, it's nice to kind of see how music and spirituality and religion also show up within not only this work, but kind of Theaster's practice in general.
Yeah. And I think a really great example of a work that is about this kind of a celebration of Southernness, and at the same time materially speaking to the migration experience. Like if you see in the bottom left register, this bronze sculpture of a Black Madonna and Child, which is a replica of a keychain that Theaster carried with him on his journeys between Chicago and Mississippi. The siding of the Mississippi Pavilion was from a reclaimed barn in the Midwest. The top here of this sort of architectural sort of roof, arched roof, is from, I want to say, a Henry Louis Sullivan, a decommissioned building in Chicago. Mm-hmm. The siding of this trailer room in the back with the monitor on it came from the Park Avenue Armory in New York and was reclaimed but fabricated in Maine. And so you just have all of this really important and intentional movement and sort of this collation of materials that reflect very much the kind of personal journeys of Black folks during this time.
Next slide. And I want to just remind everyone that this is just a kind of selected installation view. So this is not all the work in the show, but just gives some highlights into what's on view. A House Called Florida by Allison Janae Hamilton is this 3-channel film installation that looks at North Florida. Looks to North Florida and really kind of celebrates Floridians. In some ways, it's kind of a kind of inquiry into like what happened when people left, like what happened to the land when people left. So there's these really kind of beautiful landscapes and scenes of North Florida, but then also kind of follows these kind of two characters that are leaving and moving between this plantation home. It's kind of embedded in Southern sounds and music, and just a lot of, I mean, what's so wonderful about this installation is seeing when people kind of bury down in the beanbag and just get like truly immersed in this installation, which is a 34 minutes, and people really stay like the whole time, which is really beautiful.
It's really magical and mesmerizing. It's
Completely.
34 minutes, but it feels like 5 minutes. So like you just want it to keep going and going. Next slide. So here we have on the left an installation image of Carrie Mae Weems's installation, Leave Now. And on the right, you see a series of inkjet prints that accompany her installation called the North Star. You know, and in the foreground, you see just to identify, you see on the floor, Leslie Hewitt's, one of her 3 sculptural interventions within the space as well. To sort of dwell on Carrie Mae a little bit, you know, one of the things that we wanted for this project overall was to have a sense of great diversity, not only of like what the artwork looks like or in the show, but just a diversity of investigations. And I think Carrie Mae, her project, I think, was really truly a deep dive into her a really sort of traumatic story in her family, the story of the disappearance of her grandfather, Frank Weems, in 1936. Frank Weems was a part of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union and was an organizer, labor organizer across a sort of transracial coalition, and those activities really made him a target as he was advocating for better work conditions for cotton farmers, and he encountered mob violence and was believed to be dead, but made his way into Chicago, but never to be seen again or reunited with the family. And so, you know, experiencing Carrie sort of piece together this narrative was just inspiring and one of the most transformative experiences I think I've ever had in working with an artist. And sitting in the installation, you know, the minute that we were like, okay, this is done, and just feeling the magnitude of how seismic this project is, not only in terms of her wider practice, but personally to her family, was just profound.
Yeah. And then I think learning at the opening when she was on panel that she was really kind of thinking about continuing this investigation by way of creating a mock trial in Arkansas about the disappearance of her grandfather, you know, continuing to be really profound. And, you know, again, I think it's one of those kind of special moments for a curator to hear how the work will kind of continue to evolve and it doesn't stop here, right?
Absolutely.
Next slide. So just to talk a little bit about volume 1, which is, you know, you and I thought early on, and really were inspired by, you know, We Wanted a Revolution exhibition that was organized by Catherine Morris at the Brooklyn Museum, and Rujeko Hockley, who was at the Brooklyn Museum then, but now at the Whitney Museum. We knew because, you know, this was such historical content. I mean, but we were organizing a contemporary art show. The value of a critical reader was in fact invaluable. So we amidst a kind of, again, a time where we thought that we would be visiting a lot of archives. We had the ability to realize this really dynamic publication through digital archives and a really fantastic research team. And this, I think one of my favorite things about the critical reader, there's so many favorite things, but really seeing the migrant kind of stories kind of interspersed throughout the publication is really, really quite special. And the migrant stories are, but they were letters, letters of Negro migrants from 1916 to 1918 that were found in the Journal of Negro History. And Sharifa Rhodes Pitts brought this kind of resource to us and was wonderful. The thing that I love most about the letters are the dignity, like the dignity within the language that people are using to ask folks to consider them to be in a place. I'm going to read one, if that's okay.
Yeah.
This is from a migrant from New Orleans and Louisiana, April 23rd, 1917. They say, "I will gladly take position in northern city or county where a man's a man. Here are a few positions which I am capable of holding down: laborer, experienced porter, butler, or driver of a Ford car. Thanking you in advance for your kindness, beg to remain." I love that, beg to remain.
Beg to remain. Yeah. I just can't get over how, when I came to Mississippi, I want to say in April of 2021, and we were in the thick of trying to decide what was going to remain in the book, what was going to get cut, and like trying to figure out how we were going to weave all of these different nodal points together. And big shout out to our book designers, Polymode, who really helped us both through their design and their like deep attention to the material, create a polyphonic book that is in many places at once, has many voices at once. And those migrant letters from originally published in the Chicago Defender, I think really give us a sense of the stakes of what, what this scholarship does, that it takes those stories and places them, or those letters, and places those stories into a wider frame that we now have the pleasure of critical distance to understand. But I think we're still trying to understand, like, when you get to the heart of the matter, like what motivates one to make such a decision that has deep reverberations and transformations across generations, like, and that feeling, that magnitude is something that we also wanted to feel in the book that we created. So
yeah, I think that magnitude is also what's really inspiring for the future of this scholarship. Like, it's there, and Bernadette Pruitt talks about it in her essay, In Search of Freedom, Black Migration to Houston, 1914 to 1945, which is like, we're only scratching the surface here, because there is so much to kind of discuss in relationship to the Great Migration and its impact on America and Black bodies in space. This is, it's a call really for continued scholarship and continued investigation. And I think this book really opens up some possibilities that might not have been, available before in this way. You know what I mean?
yeah, I hope so. I really, really hope so. Go out and buy the book.
Look at that book. We also, maybe next slide, which is just a few examples of some spreads that are present in the book. You can get more information when you buy the book. We also have volume 2, which is an exhibition catalog. Jessica and I wrote an essay titled Destinations, Return and Legacies, Expanding Portals for New Movement. You know, we really talk about the kind of, we talk about the exhibition and we talk about our artists and kind of 4 movements, right, around refuge and agency, community, memory, and speculation. And then there are newly commissioned texts by Jesslyn, Sharifa Rhodes Pitts, Kiase Lehman, and Dr. Willie Wright, which is really exciting. And next slide, examples of artist entries that were done by our curatorial assistants, Cynthia Hodge and Amari Gibson. Next slide.
And then we also wanted to, because we're overachievers, or we just deeply believe in the power of printed matter. I think we wanted to create a gallery guide that was free and accessible in the galleries, but also something that had heft to it that you could take home and really do a deeper dive into the artists and their investments and their work and their process. And so we collaborated with our education and interpretation teams to provide a free publication that will be distributed across all venues for the tour, which we're also really excited about. So some of the content, well, the content of course is interconnected, but there's a more concentrated understanding of process in this publication. So we're excited to offer this as well.
Next. Thank you. Next slide. You know, I think, you know, in collaboration with our interpretation and education team, these visitor goals were kind of mapped out. And I think through dialogical exchanges and, you know, just desires, I think from a kind of institution to institution point of view, these were set out. And I think through next slide, the engagement spaces that we have here at the Mississippi Museum of Art have been and continue to be realized. And so at the top left, where this kind of reading quiet space nook is a kind of point of departure. Again, we kind of asked individuals, as we did for the front porch conversation, like what comes to mind when you hear the Great Migration? And so people have an opportunity to write on these postcards about their kind of connection to the Great Migration. And these postcards were distributed at art fairs and community meetings and other places, and really kind of helped think about a kind of interpretation strategy within the gallery. And then we have a kind of family corner for this in particular, which I think will be really exciting, honestly, to see how other institutions kind of treat the kind of resource matter that artists have used to inform their projects. But here we have this kind of prompt to think about, for a visitor, where would you begin to, if you were asked to kind of create an artwork about your connection to a moment in history, where would that be? And for this, Robert Pruitt started with a family photo of a family reunion from the 1970s, which really informs the kind of composition of A Song for Travelers. And so that's another kind of point, if you will. And then I think the third engagement space here at the bottom is is a kind of legacy wall. So at the MMA, I mean, we're very, each exhibition will always have engagement spaces, and this is the approach that we took based off of our early conversations on the goals that we wanted. But the legacy wall allows people to kind of leave the exhibition and then spend some time reflecting on individuals who have played a significant role in their journey, in their life, and they're able to kind of put this on the legacy wall, which has filled up significantly since this image, which is really beautiful. And then another thing that's quite important is this kind of storytelling initiative that will travel from institution to institution, called Roots and Roots, which really allows for people to kind of share their connections to, again, the nodal points, if you will, Black life across the United States, from Mississippi to Baltimore, Baltimore to Brooklyn, where the show will, travel to, and then going across country to Los Angeles. But what really the Roots and Roots opens up, and what we see on the portal right now, is like the global migration and individuals' stories on how they landed where they are, which is really quite spectacular. Would you?
I need to talk about the tour, actually, before we move on to Q&A.
Yeah, let's talk about the tour.
So the exhibition is with our with the Mississippi Museum of Art until September 11th. There are going to be some phenomenal closing events, which I know folks will be gearing up to talk about soon. Then the work, next slide, will travel to the Baltimore Museum of Art this fall. October 30th is the opening date, and it will close January 29th. We are incredibly excited, in the throes of thinking about honing our design plans and our programmatic plans, and it's such an abundant time. Then the show will travel to the Brooklyn Museum, March 3rd through January 25th of 2023. So you're seeing this kind of migrant migrant pathway mapped onto the tour, which is really wonderful. And then lastly, well, not lastly, but what we're able to share now is that the show will then travel to the California African American Museum later next year in the summer, August 5th, 2023 through March 2nd, 2024, and stay tuned for additional venues. Yes. So with that being said, I feel like this is a great moment to open it up to Q&A. So I wonder if there are any questions in the chat. And if not, we can keep talking.
Yes, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the chat or to go into the Q&A box. But in the meantime, I just wanted to quickly thank both of you. I can tell that you have such energy between each other, and it was really noticeable on this webinar. And thank you so much for sharing. I think if there aren't any questions, or you all are free to type in questions, I wanted to just quickly talk about maybe some of our upcoming programs from the Mississippi Museum of Art during this exhibition. We have, of course, regular Sunday tours at 2 and free admission on Sundays. And then in the month of June, to help celebrate Juneteenth weekend, we have free admission on the 18th and 19th, as well as a story time and art activity with children and families on the 18th. On June 23rd, the artist Akia Brion from the show will be coming into Jackson along with her grandfather to premiere her film, Mississippi Goddamn, and host a conversation with us after. And then if you'd like to hear from Ryan again on site in the exhibition, June 25th, she'll be here to greet visitors and show around the exhibition. And then I guess, of course, if you have any questions about our museum, about this exhibition, you don't have to share them on this call. You can reach out to me or another member on staff, and we can get you connected to the museum in the best way that we can. Otherwise, I encourage you all to become members of the museum, share out this program, come visit the exhibition, and join me in thanking Jess and Ryan for such an amazing talk. And I hope that everyone has an amazing weekend ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie.
Thank you all. All right. Thanks. I guess I'll close it there. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.